everybody, and welcome to our weekly colloquium with the Anthropology Department. I am very excited to introduce this week's speaker, whom you all know and love. Oh, good, everyone's here. Okay, so today we have the privilege of hearing from Alissa Jordan, not about her associate directorship of the Center for Experimental Ethnography, but about her own really incredible research. Alissa, as you know, is a multimodal cultural anthropologist. She received her PhD in anthropology from the University of Florida in 2016, and her research focuses on questions of bodily being, bodily security, and creativity across field sites in rural Haiti, urban Ghana, and in social spaces in virtual and augmented reality. She investigates these questions using methods of experimental writing, collaborative nonlinear filmmaking, sensory mapping, photography, museum exhibition, and digital experimentation. And she's currently researching women's experiences of birthing and care as resistance in the context of hospitals that imprisons mothers, infants, and other patients as a result of debt. I am super excited that we're going to hear from her today because she is absolutely the heart and soul of the CEE. You all know her and are here because she's been so supportive of all of your projects and definitely the most fantastic partner for me. So please join me in welcoming Alissa Jordan.
Thank you so much for that introduction. It's great to see all of you here and have a chance to talk to you a little bit more about my research. I also want to acknowledge that I'm giving a talk about Haiti, and some of you may not know, some of you may know that it's in a really difficult place right now. So I just want to put a pin in the fact that the people that I'm going to be speaking with and showing video from our collaborative experimentations with are in a moment of really extreme difficulty, and I think that it's really important to come away with a message, hopefully, that listening to Haitian publics about methods of intervention and like ways of dealing with current crisis is absolutely crucial in terms of charting the path forward. Okay. So my talk is going to be interspersed with media. I'm really interested in extra-textual formats, like Deb said, and I'm going to be gathering together today some audio work, collaborative video documentation, and a collaborative trauma-informed art-based workshop that I carried out over the summer with human rights workers and survivors of hospital detention in northern Haiti. It's going to be divided into two sections, the talk, so kind of like a media experience. I'm going to turn the lights off in just a second. In the first section, I'm going to talk to you about my core concerns in bodily care and motherhood, and I'm going to connect these with notions of Marronage against a video background. These are going to include videos of healing and care that were filmed by and for mothers in their homes in central Haiti, and collaboratively filmed with actually two of the mothers that you're going to see on scene. So in some scenes, they're in front of the camera, and in other scenes, they're actually behind the camera. In these images, you'll see Marronage, a mother caring for herself and her newborn foster son, Bryant, as well as her own infant son, Fofiel, and you'll see Marie Mose caring for her adult daughter, Fabienne, during her pregnancy. Then we're going to come to these scenes of an intense ritual remedy that Avadra Aloua carried out and performed in order to save the life of Marie-Delaine. And you're also going to see Gede Brave Aloua, a deity, and really just a spanking good time. She's a vivacious and bold teenage girl who comes from a land of the dead and descends often into the head of mothers in the courtyard where I work. And so we're going to see her visiting a human family and bringing remedies and rowdy jokes from the land beyond the water. After that portion of my talk, I'm going to turn to some preliminary video from the workshop in North Haiti, and by then I think you'll see how it is connected. I'm really excited to hear what questions you guys are going to have today at the end, and I will try and be really prompt and keep it to 45 minutes. Okay. actually not gonna, it's gonna be like 2 minutes before I forget what's up, but you can hang out there. As the title suggests, I'm working with mothers as both healers and resistance workers in everyday life, and in this work I want to focus on the way that mothers heal themselves and one another, as well as children, how they exercise reproductive care and reproductive choice, some becoming engaged in child mentorship and child rearing, some giving their children temporarily or permanently to others so that they can heal and find rest. I'm doing all of this drawing from a Haitian and Haitian voodoo way of being, which has a lot to do with care, care as touch, care as listening, and care as bodily attentiveness. Although I'm increasingly doing an anthropology of reproduction, I'm actually really interested in metaphysics and aesthetics. What tendencies does the world have? What movements are possible within it? What kind of beings inhabit it? And what does survival feel like, or even mean, when we are each of us in bodies that will die? What does it mean to value survival in that kind of context? And in these bodies, when we're changed by illness or violence, what part of us must survive for that survival to mean anything at all? My current book project focuses on bodily openings, such as the openings of wombs, mouths, skin, eyes, dreams, and other places, as sites where society, living beings, and the entire cosmos can transact with like these individual human destinies. In this talk, I'm connecting these insights into bodily care for my book project with new work on hospital detention, and especially the postpartum debt imprisonment that women experience throughout Haiti, but also it's a global problem, so it's not just situated in Haiti. And I'm going to be drawing from ideas of world-building, flight, and resource repossession in the vein of Marronage to understand how women chart out new futures and alternative worlds outside of the spaces of public health industries. My work draws from 3 main sites in Haiti, Akaye and Montri and Carrefour and Cabaret, or Akaye and Montri, which are 2 separate places, and then Carrefour and Cabaret, which are 2 places much closer to Port-au-Prince. I've been working there since 2010 with healers and mothers and other ritual artists. And I've more recently added OCAP and Jacmel, and the work that I'm showing for hospital detention is from OCAP. So, first we're gonna open with a guide to postpartum healing and bodily care in the words of a woman healer and mother herself in Haiti, Nell. You'll hear her voice at first, and then it's overlaid with a Haitian Creole voice actor. Okay? Okay, it's very quiet.
The screen is muted, I think. There we go. Okay. Look at the screen. I did in fact test this once.
It's like it's behind that one.
Yeah.
Like maybe you need to exit and then it's, yeah.
Oh, it's not the video I'm trying to play.
Sorry.
I'm trying to play that audio file, which I played moments before you arrived here, suspiciously. It was working fine.
I think it might be
It looks like it's playing.
Very curious.
Yeah, it's playing, we just
The system audio.
can't
is-
hear it.
The whole system's audio is not doing anything. You should be getting a beeping there.
Whale. It's going to be a problem when the video happens. Oh, I wonder if I'm turning that on. It is that.
Yay.
It was that. For the future, do not have the mic on when you need to use the audio. Okay, great. Thanks. Let's revisit. Okay. This is just audio, then we'll go to video.
out of the when a person gives birth, whether coming out of the hospital or giving birth at home, women in her family bathe her in a prepared room in the house. They bathe the baby and put it down to rest. There is an herb that is used to help the baby pass his first stool. It's called gudo. People boiled water for the baby, and they gave him that water. And then the baby passes the black stool. And what about the mother? She is laying down, one pins on her, with her head wrapped from the cold, socks on her feet, and the woman make food for her, and then boil tea to help heat her up, and thus to also help heat the baby up. And after that, they make food. Normally, they make tea. You can boil plantain for her. Plantain and fish is particularly good, or plantain and meat. And after they give her that, they go and put beans on the fire as well. Because you know, a child just came out of you, and your abdomen is empty, you need to stuff it up with food. You put beans on the fire, make a big spread of food. Some people make one grits instead of beans, which is also good, but not rice. That isn't heavy enough. It's better to make one grits with a bean sauce, a stew of greens, all for her so that she can eat a lot at night. Again, you make tea to give her to help keep her body warm. When you are pregnant, when you are about to give birth, you can't be outside. You should tie your head with a place to rest, because that which came out of your body is not a lifeless ball of fabric. It's a child. An entire child has pushed its way out of your body and your muscle are open and unhinged. It takes 15 days, sometimes 22 days, before you can safely bathe in water that hasn't been properly heated, before the band show is finished. And even then, you do it with great care. The muscle of your body have to harden and tighten back up. Have to, a pull be, close your body back up. People prepare food for you and bring it to you to eat. You sleep there, you drink your tea there, tea's on, never plain water. If you don't stay inside and care for yourself, you get fritzy. I got fritzy with my firstborn baby. It was after the baby died, and I was completely distraught. I didn't want to take care of myself. I just did whatever with my body. I didn't wipe my head. I didn't put long sleeve shirts on. I went outside into the open air. I couldn't stand up or walk. I was bent over, crawling on my knees. I was so sick. I had uncontrollable diarrhea, and my skin became yellow, so yellow. But listen to what God did for me. My mother was there. She was already seen it happening and had fetched the herbs, began boiling them for me. She bathed me 3 times in a hot water steep and herbs. Inside the house there, she had me stay inside that house there for many days. That is the only reason I got better.
In Haiti, the perspectives that people with wombs have on metaphysical questions of survival and bodily encounter are crucial. Women not only negotiate the arrival of new beings into this universe, but it's more than just the physical aspect of that, for not all mothers physically bear children, and not all who bear children choose to be mothers. Nonetheless, women manage the concrete labor of contesting the terms under which their bodies will function as vessels for reproduction, and their significant, often ignored, and unfairly disproportionate labor of mentoring infants and children about their bodies and through these bodies so that they can learn about the worlds that they live in. In the Black Feminist Transnational Reproductive Justice Framework, Dorothy Roberts, Loretta J. Ross, Julia Chinyere Opara, and others have demonstrated how, among other domains Western medicine has enacted and indeed been created through, unfreedoms, constraints, and costs placed upon Black birthing people and in Black reproductive care in general. Obstetrics and gynecology were born in experimentations on enslaved women's bodies, and thus core understandings of reproductive anatomy and physiology emerge at sites where bodies could be womanly without being fully human. The continued global reach of control and coercion in women's reproductive health is part of a phenomenon that Opara calls obstetric apartheid, referring to the ways that obstetric medicine, birth, and care seem to follow global patterns that map over lines of race and color, even though these are expressed in locally nuanced ways that come from entangled histories. In health development spheres, few subjects have been as targeted as mother-infant dyads or pregnant mothers. Across the world, maternal mortality is considered a prime indicator of population health. In Haiti, the maternal and neonatal health outcomes are among the worst in the Western Hemisphere, and that's a fact that's quoted kind of ad infinitum in public health circles in Haiti. For every 190 births or near births in Haiti, a mother will die. Considering the average birth rate for women is around 3, some estimate it to be around 1 in 64 women will die in childbirth or of pregnancy-related causes, and that's pretty accurate for the site at which I work in Arcaye. Yet the literature reminds us many women still birth at home. Many who make it to hospitals arrive only in a state of dire emergency, waiting until the last possible minute to go. As you might imagine, there's a slew of anthropological and medical studies trying to determine what prevents women from getting to hospitals, where the outcomes might indeed be bad, but they're certainly statistically better than managing a complicated home birth at home, or managing a complicated birth at home. In this story, women can't afford medical care, or they can't get far enough, quickly enough to receive it. That seems to be the main conclusion from this work. But those studies obscure the fact that women in states of emergency, when home birth is no longer considered viable, will go to NGO-operated hospitals to find them closed or to be turned away because their case is too serious, because the doctors are out, or simply because, as I've often seen the case, someone funded and built a hospital that operated for a few months, took patients, charged them, fundraised aggressively for that opportunity, and then disappeared into the night. So the context I want you to see here is a maternal health sector that's quite complex and difficult to navigate. It's filled with a lot of so-called healthcare deserts. It's vastly dominated by foreign funds, foreign NGO and mission hospitals, clinics, and centers, most of which have virtually no financial, juridical, social, or moral accountability to Haitian publics, most without even any accountability to the Haitian state. In this context, routes to hospital birth are difficult and bring women face to face with gendered violence, as well as racial, geopolitical, and religious discrimination. Home birth, however, has its hard limits. For some human women, somewhere around 1 in 10, the ability to survive birth comes down to a single operation, the cesarean section, which, although it is catastrophically expensive in many cases, is the most common major surgery in the world. Survival is, in that context, something that many people have to purchase, and many in rural Haiti can simply not afford. That said, plenty of hospitals in Haiti don't do it, so it's not even a question of just getting to the hospital. Some that do it will let you die on the steps in childbirth if you don't have funds immediately to present, because they won't let you accrue debt. Others will give you a cesarean section only to hold you as prisoner afterwards, because they let you accrue debt. The practice of patient imprisonment for debt, which is most often used against women after cesarean sections globally, rose to prominence in sub-Saharan Africa following neoliberal health reforms, as bioethicist Kikuchi Yumba Pascal has studied. These measures really looked at the sustainability of primary health services, and they instituted a multinational agreement to commercialize medicine that had reaches far beyond sub-Saharan Africa. Effectively, this puts a premium on NGO, mission, and hospitals that can demonstrate that they're sustainable and that they're good at getting money out of people to pay for services that they provide. In such a system, the cost of hospital-based reproductive care for women is a lot more than just goods or dollars or cents or distance. Decisions about reproductive care include but exceed the realm of economy, and the decisions that women make to do what's best for themselves and to take certain risks and attempt to manifest good outcomes on their own, all of these play into stories that circulate, to the stories that women tell, and the warnings they hand out to other mothers about what care was like in public health structures and how that differed from their care at home. Now let's go back to the question of what care is like for women outside clinical spaces. And I'm going to highlight here that that's care for the vast majority of birthing people in Haiti, where well over 78% still birth at home. This is the care that they receive before and after birth, like we heard about from Nell. In our Gaye, women of all ages and young children make up the vast majority of sick patients in the courtyards of medicinal practitioners. And in Bargoku, the place in Akaye that I'm referring to, a small village, but it's where I've done most of my work, that those kind of traditional practitioners include Mambo, Wangan, male and female priests, and Docteur Fay, which are like herbal doctors in town, as well as doctors that can set bones and a number of other specialties, all operating within traditional medicine. I'm highlighting here the medicinal techniques of Haitian voodoo because they tend to be dominant where I work in healing. Even if people are evangelical, they will go to Docteur Fay and other traditional doctors to seek healing in times of emergency. But it's also important to point out that evangelical practices also have their own healing modalities, which are crucial, and pastors can be involved in healing in similar ways to the ways that Wangan are. In daily life, the threats that women avoid and mediate in their body are both visible and invisible. They range from the common and broad threat of really high maternal mortality rates to emotional conflict, environmental change, gestational diabetes, incoming epidemics and pandemics, zombie attack, and Zika virus. Scars and swellings and sites of old pains are crucial waypoints through which women are able to sense and narrate danger, or through which they recall past moments of care, as well as neglect and comfort, as well as violence. Erica Capel-James addresses the Haitian Creole concept of insécurité as a framework, or a theorization really, of the ways that structural violence and inequality are mediated at the bodily level by women whose bodies are more open than those of men and children, again, as we heard Nell mention, and whose quest to wrestle with trauma in their own bodies actually do social labor. In order to survive, women use a range of strategies. They monitor their bodies with great interest and care. They acquire herbal medicine. They purchase bootleg or gray market pharmaceuticals advised by other women. They strategically save for specific procedures and medical checkups if they suspect illness. And if the situation is particularly bad, they will attempt to get medical care at clinics and hospitals, a task which often fails because doctors are not in, as I mentioned before, because of these other problems of access that exist. So just in terms of pure numbers, there are simply more concrete experiences of successful home healings for serious conditions than there are for hospital healings. But hospitals are still crucial nodes of certain kinds of resources if through luck or perseverance or creativity, women manage to get in and then with equal difficulty get back out. So common, so repetitive are these battles against illness and other insécurité that the postpartum period can be described itself as a rhythm created by the diagnosis, interventions, healings, and care used to keep women and babies alive. That rhythm, like the rhythm of sleep, is tapped out on skin from other skin, leaving its marks on surfaces all over the world. In spite of that, women don't speak of themselves as hopelessly vulnerable. Instead, they speak about themselves as people who are very good at reading, sensing, and responding to the signs of illness in their bodies and in the bodies of other people. At an early age, they work to identify the signs of risks appearing in their skin. They learn to respond to them and to fortify themselves against unwanted intrusions, while also taking time to replenish their bodies with necessary sustenance, medicine, and care. This bodily maintenance and care is a self-determining practice that women use to hone and heal their bodies and the bodies of their children to manifest markedly different alternatives for what care and attention and knowledge seeking about bodies should look like, and what reproduction and reproductive choice should be like more broadly. In Haitian voodoo, bodies are permeable to one another. Emotions, relationships, and insecurities move through people and families. They pass into dreams through skin, blood, and bone. They affect the fluids and tissues and energies of the body on their way through. Illness, as well as the medicines needed to treat it, can be taken into the self through these bodily openings. One way to avoid intrusions and to invite wanted contact is in the act of bathing. Cleaning one's bodies and one's bodily openings is the ground floor of not just visible healing, but also invisible wellness and balance, or I'm just avoiding here the typical physical, spiritual dichotomy. But the point is that it extends just beyond the boundaries and the limits of the physical body that you see in front of it. In front of you. The skin, like any other surface, is something that has to be rigorously maintained. The same word, baigner, is used for routine bodily washing, summer beach days, and crucial life-saving herbal infusions like those you're going to see here on film, and that are being used with babies to heal them. In these remedies, these fluids are applied to the body, and these herbs, especially at the points which are considered to be the most porous, such as the mouth and the knees, and the stomach and abdomen of a pregnant woman. When Marronage prepares Bryant, that's who we see on screen here, her foster son, for a bath, she first draws the water from the local canal. She brings it back to her house and pours it into the bathing basin to leave it in the sun to warm. Clean water is not called clean or good, it is called beautiful. And that's like with a long drawn out vowel. De l'eau belle. La mer belle. In cleansing her own body and in teaching Bryant about his body, Marronage removes the harmful residues that accumulate on Bryant's skin, in which in this case we're considered responsible for his illness because he's ill in these videos. Crasse is the general residue that bodies are known to excrete and accumulate when they're in contact with one another. That's the dead, dry, grayish skin cells that appear when you rub your hands together vigorously, or like the dandruff on your scalp, the oily, thick coating on your skin, especially that which appears around your neck, collarbone and upper backs, and elsewhere. The mark of a neglected child is an accumulation of crasse. Although their bodies may temporarily have dirty streaks on them from mud or soil or a smear of snot, it's the presence or absence of crasse which speaks to their care. The goal of bathing is to rid crasse and to infuse the body with other healing substances instead. When I was living in Nels-la-Cour, her courtyard, I sometimes shared the same room with Marronage and Bryant's, and I would hear her fretting about Bryant's illness late into the night, even at times, unlike this, where he does appear sick here, but there were many other times where he did not appear sick at all, and Marronage was extremely worried. I was a graduate student at the time, and I was really troubled by how incongruent our experiences of Bryant's were. I certainly knew that he was sick sometimes, but I didn't think of him as a baby who spent his whole life sick. And I thought at the time that I had this really deep point to make about it, that somehow like wellness itself was suspicious for infants, or that help was so rare that any kind of like healthy fat baby will just create suspicion in a community. And I was completely wrong. I came to learn time and time again that because through Nell, Marronage, and Mari Moses' actions who you see on film, that these late night vigils and these periods of worry would be followed quite shortly later by shifts in his body that indicated signs of illness that I, through my own modality, had come to recognize and would finally admit were real after like 3 or 4 days. Marronage, like so many other of her women peers in Sur La Pointe, had ways of reading bodies, which she honed through practices of bathing Bryant's and bathing herself 3, sometimes 4 times a day. When Marronage tried to seek medical help and find an open healthcare center during that early period, she would have been turned away by doctors and told to return when things got worse. I've seen it happen in countless other cases. So, the knowledge Marronage and Mari Mose and Maud and Brave built over a lifetime of being in bodies, here's Brave, was an expertise. A core part of learning bodily care in Haiti is about listening and attending to things I could not directly relate to, and accepting that an ideal of transparency or a perfect translation about bodily states was not a principal foundation for knowledge. Part of this knowledge that women built also came through narrating and exchanging stories of health struggles with other women and families in town. These stories circulated when women or children would get sick, when news would spread from house to house quite rapidly, and also years or decades later after an illness when they would get discussed again because similar threats or structural conditions reemerged. I'm thinking about these video collaborations as part of that, as instructional and illustrative in the same vein that oral storytelling is, but with, I guess, in some ways more of a central immediacy. So I think of them as like voodoo public health advisories. By navigating their experiences in bodies that are especially ill, but bodies that are also especially sensitive, women generate urgent knowledge about immediate social dangers, as well as metaphysical knowledge about the way that human bodies and human communities can and should work in relation to one another, and what deep forms of care are necessary so that people survive. What does it mean to think about these healing practices as part of the tradition of Haitian Marronage, as a way of enacting freedom in the context of profound constraint and injustice? In Haiti, the practice of Marronage was critical for the success and strength of the revolution, for the circulation of military strategies, and it's a state under which enslaved people built the nation state or were able to successfully revolt. As a concept of great importance in the Black radical tradition, Marronage has also been taken up in Black queer feminist updates that highlight the importance of women as maroons, complementing what had largely been a masculinist field of study up until that point. In these readings, Marronage is not only confined to acts of grand marronage, which women also did participate in, that's literally escaping, but also acts of self-determination, resistance, and fugitivity that occur in the face of confinement, and which women and women in the Caribbean have pioneered. These have differently been called micro-marronage, marooning in place, or in a recent dissertation by Bianca Beauchemin, sensual marronage. Shauna Sweeney has looked at the phenomena of enslaved women in Jamaica who run away to the market, where they were able to exercise more economic, political, and reproductive possibilities outside of the intrusive gaze of plantation owners. And more recently, Crystal Edens explores marronage as reproductive justice in colonial Haiti, providing evidence that enslaved girls and women who escaped to maroon communities had much higher live birth rates. In Haiti, marronage was of crucial importance to the national story, a way enslaved people exercised agency, fought for collective and individual liberation, imagined and protected new worlds, and used surreptitious and fugitive extractions from centers of power towards its margins. As a mode of being that holds universal importance, Neil Roberts argues that marronage understands liberty not as an essential principle that stands by itself, but liberty is always in liberation from enslavement or in relation to enslavement. And what are these mothers doing if not learning, living, and experiencing home health as a way of freedom? Both liberation from illness which has had both physical and moral significance, and freedom from the outside, the entrapping and hostile force of hospitals and public health systems that can't listen to them. In Haitian folk medicine, bodies are considered to be permeable and extendable. Human wastes and wounds can open and close. And I kind of talked about this before, and we're seeing the effect of it here. Heads can heat up or cool down. Blois can descend into people's heads and take over. Bodies, in short, are not these unified, stable entities imagined by neoliberal individualism, nor are they hyper-communal, solely outward-facing entities that lack interior experience. According to ideas about life force and energy, caught up in the substance known as numb, humans are animated without and within by a number of relations between persons, places, things, beings, times, histories, and dreams that have come before. As J. Laurent Mattery argues, people who practice and follow Afro-Creole religions in the African diaspora have engaged in a complex lived theorization of human identity and physical being as something that is multi-sited, multinational, and many, long before the term transnational got taken up by anthropologists or as a field of study. Motherhood and infancy are critical time periods when babies and caregivers learn to be interconnected in this way, to name and defend boundaries across these connections, and to instill this into future generations, along with bathing, acts of tasting, seeing, breathing, and smelling, instill lessons about the ways that bodies and selves are mutually entangled with those of their families. And that time period after birth is one crucial site where these lessons are especially instilled. We've heard what that looks like at home, and now I want to turn to Geraldine's story. Geraldine was one of 11 mothers who participated in a workshop on hospital prison in the north of Haiti over the summer. This trauma-informed reproductive justice storytelling workshop was organized by myself, a Haitian midwife, and a Haitian human rights activist, and I'm not naming either of them right now to protect anonymity because of the current political situation. In this workshop, we invited mothers who had been detained or who wanted to talk about hospital experiences to a 2-day workshop where they had the opportunity to speak with one another, to tell stories, to share food and share care, all the while Danite Georges, a Haitian artist and activist from Jacmel, was able to create artworks in response to their experiences and to commonalities in their stories. At the end, those who were interested in doing so were invited to tell their stories on film. And I was really surprised to find that all but one actually wanted to sit in front of the camera. So I didn't expect that, but I have much more footage than I expected I would. It was optional, and it was also organized to be at the end of the day when the filming started, the end of the last day. So people actually stayed to do it. So in any event, I think it's important to recognize that level of agency when you watch these films. To speak, mothers sat in front of a green screen in the workshop space on a hospital bench, and they're going to take, and they took us, I'm only showing you one story, but they basically, most of them took the opportunity to walk through their experiences of hospital detention and the way that it impacted how they thought of hospitals and whether or not they thought of them as viable options for the future. And some women just shared stories about how they shared stories back at home about what happened to them and the effect that they hoped it would have on the community and whether or not they would seek, other women would seek care in similar situations. So the video I'm going to show you now is still a work in progress. My goal is to actually have an animator work so that elements of the mother stories can be animated over it. But it is illustrative of key issues. And also, just kind of, I feel like I just have to mention this because it's ironic and it kind of gets to the heart of what I'm talking about, which is that the hospital that Geraldine is actually talking about is a core center where U.S. practitioners conduct USAID training for maternal health and wellness in the country of Haiti.
Orang setting pagi bunga fred, pengalaman bola pemandiri, sebuah FM, jaman fria, mapai muri, mapai sesi, pengalaman pagi ya, depuis lever malé dans ça, dans les dans ça là, pengalaman ici on se dit oh comment les enfants comme ça, bon moi les docteurs à la fin de mon résultat ils disent ça, on est sur un peu tension monte trop. Ici, elle a dit aller à l'hôpital. On y a dit, il m'a dit à l'hôpital, je vais aller. Il me dit que ça, je vais aller. On y a dit non, je vais en fonction. Aller, et force Michel, dit non, je vais aller. On a mis côté là, et puis on est là, on a l'aide là. Les nouveaux joueurs dormir. Même toujours, on fait une bonne pression, dit ma mourir. Mon frère, c'est des choses à faire, et puis même quand il y a l'autre bon barrière, dans ces bêtes, donc il a dit pas qu'à recevoir, j'en ai là, qu'à mourir sur le champ de grand-père là. Parce que même bien de ou tension montée, bébé en santé, moi, il a fait pour bébé, avec sa maman mourir, mon bébé a mourir. Là même, il va le cafou là, il va le cafou là, mon deux jeunes, en pile, parce que le docteur pas tout le monde, fait faire opération, ça retire mon voile dehors, pour ainsi la retirer, c'est ça, on t'a fait. Nous allons nous faire de carbone, nous allons faire du plan chita. C'est juste après, on vient dans le carbone. Quand on vient dans le carbone, on met des sérums sur moi, on va faire un pour un même jour. Dans 2 meses, je dis, pas de devoir, je dis oui. Et puis on va faire sonographie. Quand on va faire sonographie, le docteur a dit que c'est un bébé à la main, il n'est pas possible, là il fait qu'il y a un problème. Quand il a dit combien de mois, il dit 6 mois. Quand il y avait ça, et puis il y a les bonnes opérations pour un même jour, il y a pas de fait, il y a pas de ventement dedans. Quand il y a pas de ventement dedans, et puis il y a une demoiselle qui peut être tranchée, qui a souffert, toutes les petites dames après le bâtiment pour occuper, et puis c'est dans le moment où elle a sorti, et puis les petites dames vont passer devant moi. Et puis tension vient exagérer, vient pas de connaissance, vient pas même encore, on est obligé à bonner un piqué. Pour cette tension à calmer. Quand il y a la lèvre, on installe l'opération en demain, et puis il faut avec le tout là, encore tiré, on donne beaucoup de personnes qui pourraient pour l'arrêter là, on devrait parce que c'est retiré pour avoir un côté de coucher pour combien de côté. Quand il y a la ça me tourne encore, retourne rentrer ensemble avec mon corps. Là, on arrive, et puis il y a une anesthésie, et puis nous avons aucun docteur parlé de ça, mais il y a mourir parce que même moi, tension a exagéré, dame la mourir de la vie. Quand il y a un petit docteur, nous avons mourir de la vie, pas de problème. Quand il y a ça, et puis nous côté là, là, on a anesthésie, et puis c'est rentré, là, dit, oui, mais c'est rentré dans d'autres dames, nous sommes des dames avec nous. Quand on a dit, nous mettons au père, nous battons la vie, nous battons mourir. Et puis, opération réussie, et puis on va là, on met une couveuse. En haut, 6 mois, on est il y a deux ans, on a vraiment de maternité. Mais dans les vessies, on va bien de pour commencement, on fait péché. Mais après, on vient dans l'exéat, pour commencer à maltraiter, il y a gardé mal, besoin de pipi, forme de sécurité, besoin de toilette, forme de sécurité. Or, c'est un paquet de voix, il y a des sauver l'hôpital là, il y a des jours, il y a des milliers. Et puis, les marchés médicamenteux, si c'est à vous venir, ils vont pas mettre dans ce là. Oxygène fini sous là. Si je n'ai pas l'argent, oxygène n'a pas été là, il va bon moins. Là, on va prescription, on va un médicament, on va rien. Quand il y a l'air, on va l'exéat. Quand il y a là, il fait un mandat, on va sortir. Si c'est pour une jeune qui va aller chez manger, pour manger, on va sortir à la chez manger. Pour m'aider, il faut une sécurité là. Pour sortir sous la cour, l'hôpital là, il faut une sécurité là. Et bon, bébé, mais dormir à terre, dans ce là, il faut dire, depuis 3 heures du matin, comment c'est passé, bon, il faut tout nous lever. Au jour, le soutien d'or, sécurité, même à côté, on ne pas que folle, nous allons nous sauver, c'est nous qui allons remettre comme là. Quand il y a là, et puis bon, petit dame, et puis bon, on qui a expliqué le sens ça. Nous sommes dit depuis au bord exerce, ma vie paye. Si on va au bord exerce, ma quitte de nous, quand il y a les venir les missions au bord exerce, on fait les missions. Quand il y a la mission venue, il vient payer pour moi. Quand il vient payer pour moi, mais ça parle ensemble avec l'homme dans l'eau, qui promet mission dans l'eau, qui a les bras chiffrer mission dans le visage. Parce que je fais un pile action sur mission de à cause de mon mission de la perdre la vie. Après ça, tellement maltraité l'hôpital là, on est arrivé au lendemain, on me sent tellement humilié, maltraité, même pas, je suis déjà en train de parce que l'humiliation, ça me là à l'hôpital là. Et si ce n'est pas mission, jusqu'à on est dans l'hôpital là, Toujours. Net tap mourir, m'bap tourner l'hôpital ça encore. Grand pile monde qui était l'argent traité au mal. Bon même si bon moment arrivé dit non ça pas qu'à faire l'argent comme faire démasquer l'hôpital là pas qu'à faire l'argent encore.
What does it mean that she would rather die? How does her statement that she would rather die critique the costs associated with life at the hospital? Not just the more spectacular moment of imprisonment, but the fullness of her quest to get care, her decision to simply stay home and take her chances, her succumbing to community pressure. How do these costs get critiqued through her testimony, and how I think, at least how I'm currently thinking about the film, is like how can these be used to generate shame, which was the goal that a lot of women said they wanted to generate, that the hospitals could feel shame about this practice. In what way do mothers like Geraldine conceive of space outside of the hospital and at home as a space where life is better cared for and where life can be liberated, even if home is also the most common place that mothers die in childbirth? Marronage has been helping me think through the complexities of resistance to self-interest and certain kinds of self-interest as communal. Women make decisions to pursue care in their homes and to practice medicine and healing as daily acts. That care is not always sufficient to prevent their deaths or the death of their children, when resources and powerful institutions might be able to. How do they live through and think through this when the conditions of access are so vile and complex and hostile to their life that their choice to prioritize their own bodies and their own freedom can be seen as a model of collective liberation, of the sort upon which Haiti was built? Decisions about care may not always be oriented to the raw survival of bare life, but they are in this mode oriented towards liberation as a foundation for good life. They craft these spaces outside of hospitals. Mothers use these practices to resist the unjust conditions they face. I'm saying that kind of vaguely. So I'm talking about these bodily practices that they use as resistance, but also in some of the other women's stories, the actual act of escape or stealing a cesarean section from a hospital. So, with all this said, how do they emphasize the soul-enriching value of home care compared to conditions in the broader NGO-saturated state? And I'm thinking about this in the way that they frame self-care as the very possibility on which survival can be won, and through which you can forge new worlds and siphon resources from public health domains when those resources are necessary. So, I actually did pretty good on time. So in closing, I don't have a nice way to wrap up all of that. It's just what I'm thinking with right now. And I'd really be eager to hear what you guys have thought about it or your responses to it. So, thank you.
Do you want to field your own questions?
Sure, why not?
Well, first of all, I had some sudden flashbacks to Margaret Mead's Bathing a Baby at Four Cultures. I don't know whether you remember that too.
Of course, remember that.
And I think that if you haven't seen that one, you should watch that and see why it connects so much. Because it was very speaking to me. I guess what I'm trying to wrap my head around is what the source, the justification, or the history is behind the very hostile relationships towards the women on the part of the hospital staff. How stressed or inadequately supported are they that put them in that state of being able to be so inhumane?
I think that's a really good question. So, two of the people who came near the end, so they didn't come for the storytelling workshop part, but they wanted to come participate, share their stories, were nurses and security guards who worked in hospitals and were responsible for detaining people. So it's important to note that the midwife that we hear about who came to release people, who's a collaborator of mine, it is part of like the medical network that transfers women to hospitals when there are complications. and thus is also implicated in the practice as well, but tries to do, as you can see, a lot to fight it as much as within her power. For security guards, they frequently come from the same level of society as the mothers that they detain. Their lives are extremely precarious. Jobs right now in Haiti, to say, there wouldn't be word to describe how scarce it is to get paid labor right now and how difficult that is. And it has been that way it's not been this bad for a while, but it has been this way for many years, to the point where people just can't afford to lose their jobs. Some security guards respond to that by absorbing a lot of guilt, like the security guard that I spoke to, who would still carry out this practice, but would also try and help mothers in as much as he could, smuggle food in, lend them his cell phone, do what he could. I think it really mimics a lot of what you can read about in terms of like carceral ethnography, and how guards relate to prisoners in general. And for other guards, I think it happens through just really distancing and disavowing the connection that exists between them. In all cases, though, I would say, especially for the guards, that it's a particularly traumatic process. Even those who may be more hostile about it, I would believe that it's traumatic for them, because of how strong the values are for maternal care throughout especially the poorer communities in Haiti. So I think it's difficult, but it's done in order to win, to get money at the end of the day. Yes, Kendall.
Sorry if this is a really simple question. Thank you so much. The visuals were incredibly stunning. It was very clear that you developed a relationship with the people that were featured in your film, so congratulations on that. Sorry if it's a simple question, but why don't we know more about hospital detention as a phenomenon? Like, why haven't we heard about it, or is it that I'm not paying attention, and what's that? Why hasn't it broken more to the public sphere?
I have so many thoughts on that. I have a lot of thoughts. It's multi-level. The reason, if you're saying, why do the public who would actually care, why don't they know about it, as opposed to like doctors who do trips overseas and do know about it. I mean, there's multiple reasons that multiple parties don't circulate information about it. There has been some really good reporting done, especially by Maria Cheng of the Associated Press, who's done 4 reports in 4 different countries about it. But if I've had a chance to speak with her, and she's actually researched it in like 16 different countries and only published on 4 of them. And she's worked to try and address this question by actually publishing and then not having the publications that she works for the Associated Press like really get out there or be of interest to people. I think that one answer is because it's not considered to be that bad, because the threat that is used, and is indeed a real threat, is that if this didn't exist, if hospital detention weren't possible, they would simply let you die on the footstep of the hospital. Hospital detention is what makes maternal health care possible. Without that as a strategy in global public health, women would be dying. So instead of questioning like the foundational inequalities that make that that make it a practice and make it desirable and make it acceptable, it gets continued. And then I also think that I don't want to just make it seem like this is a purely economic choice, because I have had the opportunity in my advocacy work to speak with administrators at the hospital that Geraldine was confined at, who are in New Jersey and run massive, very wealthy hospitals here in the States. And it does come down to, in a lot of those cases, ideas about who deserves what, and a hand up, not a handout, and the idea that women should have to give something in exchange for their health. And if they're not going to put up with imprisonment long term, then they should have to exchange, in one case, they should have to donate blood regularly for the rest of their life, because there's a blood scarcity in Haiti. So there are really, I think, complex tangles of reasons. Yes, come on.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm just wondering, are there transnational modes of organizing in relationship to this institution class? And then also,
Sorry, can you say that? I didn't hear you.
Are there transnational modes of organizing in relationship to this detention?
Are there transnational modes of organizing resistance to it? So, great question. I'm trying to work on creating like a node and doing that.
Sorry?
I said I'm trying trying to really make that happen. There are people working on it, but they are isolated. Most of the work has been done in sub-Saharan Africa. And like I said, there are like several articles about it. There are a number of articles about it from a medical standpoint, that is like visiting medical doctors who go and see it and then write or incidentally appears in their report on a practice. But there are also other people, like Chatham House is one organization where Robert Yates has been working on it. And they're scattered. Pascal Kukujiyuma, like I said, at the Democratic Republic of Congo, like there's somehow this node there of work, that really good work that's getting done on it, but in terms of creating transnational connections, it hasn't really happened. The only kind of organizing I've seen that is supposedly the fix to it is just to resolve fee-based healthcare writ large across the globe. And I think that that is clearly important and a great goal to have, but that doesn't necessarily address, like, that this is still going, that even in cases where like people are going to get huge amounts of money into their healthcare systems and have it enforced so that women get free care, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, this still doesn't get to the crux of the issue about like bioethics and like what does it mean that this is an acceptable mode of generating funds from bodies, and that the only solution is that another body generate those funds instead. Like we still have a system that's built on bodily collateral. So. Yes.
Thanks a lot for that, Alissa. And I would love it if you would sort of give us a sense of the different scale or accountabilities that you're seeing here. Because like what seemed missing a little bit in my understanding of how this is perpetuated was the Haitian state. Right? I understand the NGOs, and then we see the action of people in community, women in community. I'm just wondering where the state sits in relation to these processes, but also, I guess, in particular, in relation to the NGO-run hospitals.
They're virtually, that's a great question.
Is it completely absent?
They're completely absent.
Yes, so that's why it's absent. Yeah.
I would say that because my work is multi-pronged and I'm really interested in advocacy, one good route that has been shown to end, like just at the national level, this doesn't have transnational effects, so it's really weak as a form of organizing, but it has been effective in Burundi and Burkina Faso and several other places where it's practiced, that you can get a bourgeoisie politician to care about a practice that they've never really had that much experience with, and then push through like a national ban on, say, like holding women after birth. That's been successful in a few nations. So in the case of Haiti, I think there are specific politicians, even presidents, when another president gets elected, whenever that is, who could be, curried by groups of other presidents who stood against it, and you could like write a letter, like that's a letter writing campaign basically to high levels of government is what we're looking at. But in terms of how they're involved in the practice, it's just, there are state hospitals that carry out the same practice, but even those state hospitals, the entanglements with the state are very weak, I would say. So it's very partitioned, there's very little oversight, and the Haitian state has taken a very hands-off approach to NGO hospitals and clinics for what they consider to be a good reason, and they may have a point, which is the more they get involved, the more NGOs threaten to pull out. And the more reign that you allow NGOs to do what they want, the more resources come into your country. And Haiti absolutely depends on NGO resource healthcare systems in order to provide any kind of healthcare to people. So, yes, hello.
Thank you so much for your talk. I was interested in hearing you expand on this theme of aesthetics that you're developing through this really central practice of attending to the self, of caring for the self, and then also beauty, as you mentioned, of like clean water being beautiful. And so, whatever you want to share, whether it's a story or like a further way in which you're taking this up through some of your like sort of creative work.
Great, so thanks. This is like, I would say that's like my creative work, and my book project that I'm working on right now, Atlas of Nam, which is about the way that like energies in orifices, and women map these energies as they move through orifices and through their own bodies. So I think that has a lot to do with it. I'm thinking of aesthetics. I'll just tell you what excites me right now about aesthetics, and it's why I keep going back to bathing, which might seem like this simple practice, but I'm really interested in the ways that surfaces relate to depths in these really non-transparent, opaque ways. And it can be so difficult to understand looking at the surface of a thing, of course, what's going on underneath, but that applies to all sorts of like conceptual frameworks in Haiti about health, and has been looked at in I mean, this is not like something that I've developed, this has been looked at in other work as well. Firms work in Sierra Leone, I think it is. But like the idea of surface and depth and their relationship, and how people come to rely on making judgments about things based on the way they look, and how that shapes their movements through society. And in illness, one way that I think about this is I've done sensory mapping. So in a place really replete with a lot of ritual practices that leave traces and evidence in communities, whether that's like small pieces of dirt where things have been buried or things that have been hung from trees. You get these accumulations of matter that are just from everyday human practice that come to resemble what might be a ritual practice. And I'm really interested in the way that people read and misread and interpret and move through landscapes with that kind of aesthetic expertise. And how even when things aren't magical, they can be magical, or their magical seemingness. And I'm using magical here as like a really broad term, but even when things aren't ritual-based or like related to any specific remedy, they can be interpreted as such. And so for people, how their aesthetic worlds are really just over-determined by healing and healing acts, like, and how that impresses upon them, especially at like a really young age. So I was really interested in this with like how 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds learn to avoid certain accumulations of like vegetable matter as like being potentially otherworldly and something that they don't want to become involved with, and how that like affects their ecological movements. Yes.
Thank you so much for that talk. I have a question about the women potentially who are participating in the sort of carceral economy, and women working for NGOs, women working in hospitals, and wondering if there was some tension there that you found in your field work. Like, are there significant differentiations between women on either side of that divide? Or if there are sides, and I'm sure it's more complicated, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. And also, I'd love to hear a little bit more about the process through which the film was produced. The first one of the bathing. You mentioned that your interlocutors actually led the process. So I'd love to hear how that came about, and what was their approach to it.
Great, thanks. So, yeah, I think I should probably talk more about that first one. Like what? So I have experience, like I know, because like I said, there's a nurse who participated, and then I've had my own numerous extensive experiences working with doctors, some of whom have been women, when I was doing my longer periods of field work in Haiti. So I haven't really compared it on the gender line, and it would be interesting to do so. Certainly for the guards, the men I have, because there are a lot of ways that men avoid meddling in maternal health, and where like guarding in this sense a woman and preventing her from eating is like a tremendously bad thing for them to be doing, and how they like navigate that. But in terms of like the womanhood of nurses and others, I haven't. I've only looked at it in terms of class, because there's a big class divide between educated staff, nurses, administrators, and doctors, and the non-educated guards, cleaners, and the women patients that get help. So I should definitely look at that. Thank you. Second question, collaborative filmmaking. Well, I just really liked photography, but I had no intention of doing, when I started my fieldwork in like 2010, I had no real intention of doing a film. But photography, I brought a camera to the site, and my goal was, as a way of getting to know people after I met Nell and her family, was to bring the camera around to like events and take pictures, because at the time smartphones were not around, they weren't a thing. people didn't have pictures. And so I would take pictures, then I would print the pictures, and I would bring them back, and then people would talk to me when I brought the pictures back. This was my idea about how I was going to get people to talk to me. But actually what happened is people in town, especially mothers, but also like young men, who have these great series of pictures from, wanted to pose their own self-portraits in these quite elaborate ways. So there was like a studio, like a photography studio that kind of happened. And in the midst of that, there was a friend of mine, Rikadi, at the time, who really wanted to like get the studio off the ground. Like, let's take pictures, let's share them. Everyone's gonna love this. We can sell them. It's gonna be great. And I was like, well, I'm just gonna print them and then we'll see what happens. My resisting of the economization of the practice. Then once he saw that it wasn't gonna work, he's like, okay, well, you're not gonna sell the pictures. Why don't we do a film? Can your camera do film? And I was like, you could do 2 minutes of film at a time. It was one of these old DSLRs. So I promised him I was going to get a good camera and come back. And unfortunately, he died on a motorcycle accident, actually, before I could get the camera back to the site. But when I ended up bringing the camera back, which was because of him, people, especially, I would say everyone would have liked it, but because I lived at Nell's Courtyard, like everyone in Nell's Courtyard became like the camera crew and started taking it places. And that's also how I got brought into secret society meetings, because they wanted to film secret society meetings and have documents to give the gung-ho as presents, and so it kind of just grew from there. And it started and ended with these intimate practices, but there's so much in between that's just what people want to document. And now I'm just really excited because in the past year, in spite of all the difficulties that have happened, smartphones have become superfluous in the countryside, so people are doing a lot of creating on their own now. Yes, so I think you had, in the white shirt, had a question for us. Anna?
Thank you so much. I was curious, could you tell us a little bit more about health struggle narratives? You mentioned that before you went into the genre of the production that you made, potentially is this production being an extension of that genre?
Yes.
So my curiosity is where those narratives circulate and where they don't circulate, and sort of.
It's thrilling. It's a thrilling question. They circulate. It's thrilling. They circulate. First, you've got one layer, which is women sharing stories with other women. Mm. Then you've got panics that develop in town because there's a series of illnesses. So all of a sudden, these individual stories of women's illness become broader stories of a specific threat in the community. If multiple women have gotten sick with something, even if it's very different things, people start to get nervous. The same goes for children's health. It's watched carefully. So then they become kind of elevated into a meta-narrative of illness. And there'll be periods of time when no one leaves their house for 3 days because everyone gets very concerned about the presence of either potential violence from the Haitian state, which I've never witnessed, but is certainly a fear. And I would say the Haitian state, I guess that's not really accurate, but Haitian state-sponsored violence carried out by MINUSTA or NGO or the actual visible actors with guns that exist in the areas that I work. So those meta-narratives happen, people will stay inside. And then there's also narratives that circulate on the radios a lot of times. So on citizen radio, there's stories of health, public health messaging, but then there's also these surreptitious stories, which is a chapter in my dissertation deals with this, and I'm really interested in looking at this in terms of womanhood, but about specifically the presence of loup-garou, or werewomen, within communities. And so people get really interested in these stories of if there's a werewoman that's been killing children or afflicting pregnant women in any given certain town, they'll publish it on the radio. And part of one thing I did with Marronage, and the rest of the film crew was okay, well, let's go see if we can actually find the town that they're talking about, because this is concerning, and I wanted, for a number of reasons, I wanted to see if it was possible to make actual links, but actually, we were never able to succeed. The name of the town was always slightly wrong, or it was, so I don't know how news stations come up with these stories or write them, and I'm really interested in that question. I don't have an answer there, but it's a very powerful way that illness narratives circulate, which is in such and such a town, 10 babies have been dead since such a day. So now they're highly concerned about a werewoman, and then people go on these quests to find the town to see what's happening. But also in any given town, at any given point, there are a number of babies who are going to die simply because of the horrible rate, and the same goes for women's health. So they circulate at multiple levels. And then, of course, there's media representations of it. Like, you can find a lot of narrative stories in Haitian cinema and Haitian film. Like, most Haitian film, especially the kind that circulates in the countryside, deals with that. And it's also, I think, a big reason why, like, Nigerian film also becomes popular, because there's a strand of, like, Nigerian film that deals with, like, rural countryside living and healing. And there's a lot of that circulates on people's DVD players. Yes. I'll come back to you, Jake.
Hi, my name is Lucia.
Hi, Lucia.
Yes. Klaus. Thank you so much for your work. I feel a little less lonely today. I work in southern Peru at a healing center for forcibly sterilized women. And I was really interested in your discussions on healing practices and who's involved and who isn't. Because one of the things I found is the communities that I work in are like many people still use traditional medicine, are more Catholic, and there's this growing sense of evangelical religious life. But when women come to the center for healing that involves like spiritual ceremony and all sorts of alternative medicines and not just biomedicine, evangelical women show up as well.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering if you had any thoughts about what does this say about like the depth of like cultural, the embodiment of culture, and particularly like, as we were just talking about, like the threat to community that is illness in a like in a world in which your illness is not just your own, and perhaps is like involves the spirit world, involves the ancestors, involves so many different spaces. So yeah.
Great question. Yeah. That's how I'm thinking about it, is that not necessarily, it's hard to say Haitian Vodou when people who practice Haitian Vodou don't consider themselves like Haitian Vodouistans. Like, there are just people who servi, and then there are people who just exist in a Haitian Vodou metaphysics, and then there are people who don't believe it, or well, I can't even say they don't believe it, but then there are people who deny that aspect of existence and seek like evangelical ways. And then among people who servi, like there's actual specialists who've made it their life work for various reasons, usually because of some period of illness. They've been called into the practice. And then like multi-dimensional like secret societies, etc., that operate within that space. So how I'm thinking of it is more like, that's why I like thinking in terms of metaphysics. Like, I think there are foundational metaphysical principles that circulate irrespective of religions in towns, in the towns that I've worked. And then there are certainly some practices which are forbidden for evangelicals to take part in. So Maud, who you saw getting healed near the end of the film, is actually evangelical. But 20 years before, she was a secret society queen. And when she was a secret society queen, she got sick. So she got sick again later in life, went to her pastor to be healed, it was ineffective, and as such came back to the town and place where she had been a secret society queen in the hopes that if this illness was connected to an illness that she had 20 years ago, that she'd be able to find healing for it. So it shapes the way that people move through environments. It would have been not good for her within the church to have sought this kind of healing, but also recognized as an appropriate or at least effective method of healing. And then I think there's all sorts of brands of evangelicism that are becoming syncretized within Haiti and more broadly in the Caribbean, and in a lot of places where it's continuing to spread. And it's just that Catholicism has a much longer history of syncretization, but I think very similar practices are happening of people adopting it, making it their own, finding movements through it. I mean, one thing that I always go back to is a woman who had been her whole life not a serviteur, that is, she didn't like make food for the Loa, and she had no ritual specialization, but she was raised within that framework, and she converted late in life and started going to a church. And at that church, the pastor appears in dreams. So dream healings, which are these really crucial ways through which women are healed or learn what herbs they need to apply and what different remedies and in what proportions. She was still practicing that, and the pastor pastor too was encouraging that to be practiced, as long as the person who gave her the herbs in the dream appeared with the pastor's face, then it was fine. And I think that that's really, like, broadly what I see in evangelical practice. And the things that are especially just forbidden or outside of evangelical practice are like really outside of women's maternal health care, which is considered to be like, I think, a domain where traditional medicine has a lot of power, but like if you have trouble in the market, or you have economic trouble, or if you have political trouble and you seek help at a traditional healer, that's particularly, that's where a line gets drawn by evangelical traditions.
And just as a side note, and this is the part where I feel less lonely, I have a piece coming out in the Anthem. It's called literally, I'd rather die than give birth in a hospital. I had experiences with birthing women in Peru precisely because of like forced sterilization and also just mistreatment in the hospital, so thank you.
Oh, that's really, thank you. You could read, I would also say Chris Eden's work that is like amazing. It's called Rejoice, Your Wombs Will No Longer Bear Slaves, is connected to like reproductive justice and like the need to like birth outside of these confines. But it's really, that's also a very striking title. I'm going to read you these. Thank you for that. Jane.
Yeah, thanks, Alissa. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about like the scale of Marronage, right? Like you talk about this kind of historical hegemonic understanding of it as this sort of like big revolutionary project in Haiti. Obviously, that's like these revolutionary men figures are valorized, and of course they end up reproducing structures of elitism in all these different kinds of ways. And then I hear you talking about like this idea of micro-marronage, these practices of care and intimacy. But I'm wondering how those practices of care and intimacy are also forms of like organizing, like creating world, like not organizing like Marxist organizing, like creating worlds that grow, that can contain more than just the moment of freedom of like healing yourself, but also like contain organizing and growth in them that weigh upon the state in some way that we can't even maybe imagine. But yeah, we could talk about that scale a little bit.
Okay, I love that. Like that's that's great. I definitely think that is my thinking about it, that it can be constituted, that although I'm talking here about illness and maternal health specifically, that we can speak of this as a way of indoctrinating the body into certain kinds of resistance and certain kinds of critique, and creating this capacity to, I haven't fully thought through this, so I'm just like kind of talking off the cuff, but creating this capacity to form a barrier between you and like a profoundly powerful violent system, and learning how to protect what like lies behind that barrier. So how women have to, just in the practice of getting healed, listen repeatedly to doctors saying like they're not sick or they're too sick or like whatever, and it creates this dynamic of really having to protect your own opinion about what's happening to you. And I think that self-listening that happens and how that gets spread is like a core place where resistance is made possible, both at the micro and macro level. And that being able to, especially when you combine this with the fact that women especially, and like I said, either mothers who've literally born children or people who become foster mothers, take it upon themselves to instruct children very deliberately in these ways of like knowing what's best for their own body. So I think that that's like really important. But as to the question of like macro Marronage, I'm still deciding, like, I'm reading Neil Roberts. I don't know, like, I haven't fully committed to either way. Like, I really do just find it incredibly provocative to think about liberation practices as always occurring in a dynamic of response to like enslavement. I don't know how deep that goes. Like it's not universal. It's too universal or like whatever. I don't have a response to that yet. Just that I find it very provocative to think with, a historicized, and like especially because of how it connects to Haiti, like a very this like huge concept gets like historicized within the context of daily practices and like micro practices. That's like I'm really interested in that and still thinking through it. thank you guys who stayed really a long time, and I
Thank you
appreciate
so
it.
much.